What's up? I'm Bradley, and I want to talk to you about orchids today. Beside me, I have Bulbophyllum miniatum from Africa, and then I have Dendrobium unicum from Thailand. So two orchids living in two different places, um, which are pretty cool. There's about 28,000 to 30,000 species of recognized orchids, and we're finding more species and new species every year, which is really cool. Orchids are pretty interesting in the fact that they can be found in every part of the world except for Antarctica and I believe places in the Arctic, which makes them a cosmopolitan species. Another example of a cosmopolitan species would be a killer whale. They're found in every ocean on the planet, which is pretty cool. But I'm not talking about killer whales today. I'm talking about orchids. They um, have a pretty interesting relationship with fungus. Orchids, when they are pollinated, um, they produce little seeds that are the size of a grain of sand. And you may be thinking, well, that's easy for them to just find somewhere to fucking settle down and whoop-de-doo, you know? But that's not the case. Let's think about another flowering plant that produces seed. Maybe, I don't know, a peach. Think about a peach pit. If you crack open a peach pit, what you're going to find? You're going to find white stuff called endosperm, which is energy storage for the seed when it germinates. So everything needs energy in order to grow, correct? Orchids don't have that. And so what happens is the pollinated orchid will produce a bunch of thousands of seeds and they will release them into the wind column, and just by chance an orchid seed is going to land on a species of fungus, and what it'll do is it'll find the fungus's roots, aka the mycelium net, and they will start using the energy that the fungus produces. They will start using that energy in order to grow, and over time the orchid will start photosynthesizing itself by sprouting up new leaves. What's even cooler than that is that then all of a sudden, with the biomolecules that they make from photosynthesizing, they'll provide back to the fungus. So it becomes a really cool mutualistic partnership, which I think is pretty rad. That all of a sudden this orchid seed is blowing in the wind and just by chance happens to fall on a special species of fungus. I think that's really cool. But in cultivation, when you go to an orchid breeder or someone who collects orchids, what they usually do is they will get orchid seeds and they will produce them in a lab, often putting that little orchid seed or seeds onto a gel pad that has all the nutrients that the orchid needs in order to grow. I think it's really important that we don't go out into the wild and collect orchids. So that's why when you go and find an orchid seller, because that just encourages more people to not go out into the wild and just collect these orchids. Because orchids are actually a bioindicator species, just means that if you're out in the Amazon or the woods, what have you, and where there's naturally orchids growing, you don't see any. That just means that the ecosystem is not healthy. Um, and also, if you take one from the wild, then how's the fungus going to grow? Since there's so many different kinds of orchids, they all have their different ways of finding pollinators. A long time ago, thousands and thousands of years ago, they relied on wind pollination, so abiotic factors. But now, since there are so many different species of bugs and birds and bees out there, and moths and what have you, um, they have different ways of tricking animals to pollinate them. For instance, this bulbophyllum here, look at that big moth. Wow. Anyways, this bulbophyllum here is going to flower. Well, it's not flowering now, but next year it will flower, and it will produce a flower that smells stinky. And that is to trick gnats and flies to the flower, and investigate it, hopefully pollinating it. And some will actually trick the fly into thinking, or moth, or what have you, into thinking that it is a female fly or moth. So that's pretty cool. So, yeah, orchids are really interesting plants, and I highly recommend you look into them. Maybe get one from the store. They're pretty easy to grow. Yeah, hope you learned some cool shit. See you later.